Hello and welcome to this video on adding and subtracting negative numbers. This is the second video on this topic, so if you haven't already done so, I recommend that you watch the first video on adding and subtracting negative numbers before you proceed with this one. So I'm going to quickly recap what we went through in the last video. So we were doing questions such as this: work out -4 plus 5. And in that video, what we did was we started out here as -4, we found it on the number line, and then we added 5. And you can see here the arrow here indicates that adding means we're going to the right. So if we add 5 onto this, we end up at +1, or just 1. +1. In this video, we're going to look at a slightly different situation. So let's just take some similar numbers, but the operations going on are very different. So here we had -4 plus 5, but here we've got 4 minus plus 5. Now, when signs are together like this, right next door to each other, when we're adding or subtracting negative numbers, if they're right next door to each other, the signs, then some special rules apply. So let's have a look at what those rules are. Now, don't worry if they all look a little bit confusing to begin with. Hopefully the examples that follow will clarify things. But let's just have a look at what the rules are to begin with. So, when you've got two pluses next door to each other, right next door to each other, then those become a plus. If you've got a minus and a plus right next door to each other, then they become a minus. If you've got a plus and a minus right next door to each other, they become a minus. And if you've got two minuses next door to each other, they become a plus. Now you might think, well, why do they become these signs? So for example, why do two minuses make a plus? Well, here's a little example to try and help you to understand why that might be the case. Let's suppose we have a bucket of water, like you can see here. If I've got two pluses, why do they become a plus? Well, let's have a think about it. So if we add, that's the sign there, add some hot cubes. So think about these as being ice cubes, but then think about the opposite. I know you might think, well, they can't really exist, and I know that, but think about this as for example purposes. So you've got some hot cubes instead. If I'm adding some hot cubes to that water, the temperature of that water is going to go up. And that's why we get, if we add hot, two pluses become a plus. What happens if I remove or take away those hot cubes? If I take away those hot cubes, well, the temperature of that water is going to go down. That's why if we have a minus and a plus next to each other, they become a minus. What happens if I add some cold, or if a plus and a minus are next to each other? If I add some cold, then the temperature of that water goes down. That's why if you've got a plus and a minus, it goes to a minus. And finally, if I remove that cold, in other words, take away the cold, then the temperature of that water is going to go up. That's why if you've got a minus and a minus, make a plus. Another way that you can think about it is as follows. The friend of your friend is your friend. The enemy of your friend is your enemy. The friend of your enemy is your enemy. And the enemy of your enemy is your friend. Let's have a look at how these rules apply themselves in an example. So here it says work out 3 minus plus 7. Now these rules are for when these signs are right next door to each other. So here we've got a minus and a plus right next door to each other. So that means I'm applying this rule here. And a minus and a plus become a minus. So down below here, I'm just going to write 3 minus 7. And then it becomes a question similar to what I did in the first video. 3 minus 7 takes you to minus 4. Example number 2. Here I've got a plus and a minus next door to each other. So I'm going to use the rule here. A plus and a minus become a minus. And then the question just becomes 4 minus 9. Well, 4 minus 9 takes you to minus 5. Example 3. Work out minus 2 minus plus 8. So here I've got, well, now there's 3 signs that you've got to think about. But remember, these rules only apply when you're adding and subtracting numbers, when the signs are next door to each other. So here I'm going to make that a minus. So my new question is minus 2 minus 8. Now, some people get confused that there are 2 minuses here, and they think, oh, well, does that become a plus? No, because they're not next door to each other, okay? This is just the number minus 2 minus 8. So you go to minus 2 on your number line, like we did in the first video, and we minus 8, and we get to minus 10. So you only change the sign here when the signs are next door to each other. So those 2 became a minus, but here then you just read from left to right. Normally minus 2, minus 8. These 2 minus signs are not next door to each other, so it is not as if this rule applies, okay? Because these 2 negatives here are not next door to each other, so I'm not going to apply this rule. I'm just going to read it as normal. Minus 2 minus 8 is minus 10. Example 4. Here 1 minus minus 9, those 2 are next door to each other, so now I am going to apply this rule and I get 1 plus 9, which is just 10. Example 5. Minus 4 minus minus 3. Okay, so I've got 2 next door signs here. I'm going to apply this rule here. They become a plus. Then I've got minus 4 plus 3. Now, just because you've got a minus and a plus here does not mean that this rule applies, because they're not next door to each other, okay? This minus and this plus are not next door to each other, so it's just a case of reading from left to right now. Minus 4 plus 3 takes you to minus 1. Example 6, minus 9 plus plus 4. Those 2 signs are next door to each other. A plus and a plus just make a plus. So it is minus 9 plus 4. Read from left to right. Minus 9 plus 4 takes you to minus 5. Example 7, -1 plus -5, those two signs next door to each other. So I'm going to apply this rule here. They become a negative, and then it's -1, -5. Remember, don't fall into the trap that some people do, and they think, well, those two negatives make a positive. No, they don't, because they're not next door to each other. So you just read it from left to right like a book. -1, -5. Well, if I go to -1 here and I'm -5, I end up at -6. Okay, here are some questions for you to have a go at by yourself. So pause the video now, have a go at these on some paper, and then restart the video to see the answers. And here are the answers. Very well done for having a go at those.